Welcome to the School of Motion Graphics. My name is CM De La Vega, and today's tutorial is priceless. And that's because we'll be creating and animating a 3D modern picture frame slideshow. Now, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And amigos, buckle up, because for this tutorial, we'll be going for a ride. These are the two images that we will be using in this tutorial to create this 3D frame. Now, there's two things that I did in Photoshop before I brought it into After Effects. Number one, you can see the size. It's a nice even number, 1900 by 1900. And for the rectangle, 1600 by 1900. And the second thing is, it has an alpha channel. I cut out the area where the picture will go. And this simplifies the whole workflow process of adding the pictures in. So let's get started. Let's create this 3D frame, at least for the rectangle. So select your rectangle, the Photoshop file, select that file, and let's click and drag to the composition icon. And it'll create a composition with the same size as our Photoshop rectangle file. So let's hit Control K to open up the composition settings, and let's rename this. Let's rename this to Frame Rectangle 01. And like I said, it's the same size. Now, this is very critical. It's very important that you establish the frame rate and you establish the duration at this point, because from this point forward, we will be making several copies, and each copy will inherit the frame rate and the duration that you establish at this point. So for this tutorial, we'll keep it at 29.97, and we'll have a duration of 30 seconds long. Let's hit OK, and let's make two copies. Control D, and this one, hit Enter, and let's rename it to Top. This will be the top and the bottom edge of our frame. And select this one, hit Enter. Let's call it Side. This will be the left and the right edge. So let's go to the top, hit Control K, and let's go to the Advanced, and let's anchor it to the top. We'll make some changes. Now for the top and the bottom, we have the width of 1600, but we want to change the height. So let's change the height to 100. And for the side, hit Control K again to open up the composition settings. Let's go to the Advanced tab, and let's anchor it to the left edge. Now for the left and the right edge, we want to keep the height, but we need to change the width. So let's change the width to 100 pixels. Hit OK. And if we go to the top and we double click, we have our edge for the top and the bottom. The only thing is, we do have some of the decoration of the frame. Now, usually you can go into Photoshop and you can clone it out, but there's a simple way, there's a simple solution that you can use here inside of After Effects that works pretty good. All you're gonna do is simply, you're gonna scale it in the X, and let's stretch it out and scale it. So let's hit S for scale, and let's unlink it, and let's scale it in the X. Let's put 107, and that should take care of it. And let's do the same thing for the side. Like, we're keeping it very easy. We're not complicating our lives. Keeping it very easy. Instead of cloning, let's just select the layer, hit S for scale. Let's unlink it. And in this case, let's just stretch it out in the Y. So for the side, we stretch it out in the Y axis. And then for the top, we stretch it out in the X axis. Perfect. And let's close these comps. Let's go back to our frame rectangle 01 comp. Let's hide the frame rectangle for now, and let's go to View, and let's activate Rulers, let's activate Show Guides, and let's activate Snap to Guides. And make sure that you have your info panel open. We'll be using the X and Y, these numbers, to help us place guides along the edge of this composition. So let's zoom in and just click and drag to create this guides. And like I said, right at the edge. So this will be 0. And this will be 1600, and let's go down, and this will be 1900. Okay, it looks pretty good. Let's see. This one I think needs to be down here. Perfect. Okay, ready to go. Now, let's bring in the top, and let's drag and drop. I will zoom in. Now make sure that you have snapping turned on. This is available, this feature snapping is available in the newer versions of After Effects. If you have an older version like CS5, CS6, I don't think you have the snapping feature. In the newer versions you do. So if you do have it, turn it on. Now hit Y, and if you hit Y, you activate the pan behind tool, which is an anchor point. And let's move the anchor point to the top. Now hit V. If you hit V, you go to the selection tool. And now that we have the selection tool, let's move it up. And since you snapped it, since we have snap to guides, this should snap right to the guide. And let's create a copy of this, Control D. And let's call it bottom. This will be the bottom edge. And let's move it, but let's move it beyond this guide. Now let's bring in the side. Let's call it left. And hit Y for the anchor point, and let's anchor it to the left edge. Hit V for the selection tool, and let's move it, and it should snap to the edge. And let's make a copy. Hit Control D, and let's call it right. And let's move it beyond this guide, and it should snap. So let's change it fit to 100. Let me zoom out so you can see what we have. Perfect. Now let's bring back our frame, and like I said, we'll create this 3D frame by rotating the edges in 3D. So we need to select all of our layers and activate the 3D switch to create these 3D layers, make them 3D, and select the top and the bottom. Hit R for rotation, and let's change the X rotation to 90. And select the left and the right. Hit R for rotation and change the Y rotation to minus 90. So you can see we have minus 90 for the Y. And if I zoom in, we have a 3D frame ready to go. Now it's the same process for the square. We'll skip it for now, but I will have this project available for you to download in case you do get stuck. Let's continue, and let's import our images, our pictures. Hit Control I and import your images. I will import this folder. All of these images are from pexels.com. It's a great website that has high quality images that are free to download. Now, what we're going to create is a picture holder for these images. For the square, we'll create a composition 1100 by 1100 pixels, and for the rectangle we'll create it 1100 by 1400. So let's create a folder, and let's call it pic holder. This will hold our pictures, and let's create a composition. Click on the composition icon, and let's call this square pic holder 01, and let's make it 1100 by 1100 pixels. And let's create one more composition, and let's call this rectangle pic holder 01, and this one will be 1400 for the height. Perfect. And let's populate these picture holders with our images. So let's go to the rectangle, and let's bring in the picture of the kids jumping into the swimming pool, and let's scale it down. Let's scale it down. Let's move it over. Perfect. And let's do the same thing for the square. We'll use this image, let's scale it down. Perfect. Now let's make several copies of these picture holders. For the rectangle, I will make 2 copies. Hit Control D, Control D. And for the square, let's make 3 copies. Control D, Control D, Control D. Now let me close this for now, and let's double click. Let's double click. Perfect. And all we're going to do right now is place our images. For the second one, let's change this image, and let's put another image. Let's put this one. We can scale it down. And let's go to the third one. Let's change to this image. Definitely take your time, find the right size, the right position for your pictures. And for the square, let's do the same thing. This time, instead of putting a new one, let's just simply swap it. And by swapping, all you need to do is hold on to Alt on your keyboard, or Option if you're on a Mac. Holding on to Alt or Option, let's click and drag, and it'll simply swap it. So let's go to the third one. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to swap it, but I'll scale it down a little bit. Perfect. And the last one will be the skateboard. Perfect. Okay, perfect, perfect, perfect. And let's go back to the square, and let's go back and let's get the rectangle. Now, what we need to do is let's put our picture holders in the frames. So for the frame square 01, let's put in square pic holder 01. Let's bring it in, and let's make it a 3D layer. Now, if we go to the top view, the picture is right on top. We want to push it back in Z space. We can push it back, or we can hit P for position, and we can say, let's push it back, for example, let's say 24 pixels. And what we need to do now is let's select all of these layers, Control A, and hit AA to open up material options. And where it says cast shadows, click on it, and let's turn it on. When we set up the lights later in this tutorial, it will cast shadows. Perfect. And let's go to the rectangle. Let's do the same thing, except we're going to use a rectangle pic holder 01. Let's bring it. Let's make it a 3D layer and hit P for position, and let's push it back 24 pixels. If you go to the top view, you can see that it's 24 pixels. And once again, select all of these layers. We can also drill down to material options, and where it says cast shadows, click, and it turns it on. And make sure that we have it on for all of the other ones. No, it didn't do it. Oh, yes, it did. Nice. Perfect. Okay, ready to go. And let's close all of these. Now we're ready to make several copies of our 3D frame. So for the rectangle, let's make 2 copies, Control D, Control D. And for the square, we will make 3 copies, Control D, Control D, Control D. Perfect. And what I'm going to do is let's work on the rectangle first. Let's double click. And all we need to do now is very simple, is select your pic holder and let's swap it with, for example, for the rectangle 02, let's swap it with a second. And for the third, let's swap it with the third. Very easy. Let's close this and let's go to the square. Let's double click to open these comps and select the square pic holder and let's swap it out with a second one. Swap it out with a third. And again, you're holding on to Alt if you're on a Windows. If you're on a Mac, I believe it's Option, holding on to Alt or Option, click and drag. For this one, it's the last one. So we're all set up. We're ready to build our slideshow. So let's create a new composition and let's call it Slideshow Graphics. Let's make it 1920 by 1080. And perfect. Let's create a new solid. We'll make it white or a little bit off-white. And let's bring in the frame rectangle 01. And let's bring in square 01 and 02. And let's import this wall pattern. This is a nice wall pattern that we have that we'll be using. You can import any image that you can use as a wall, or you can import a wall pattern as well. And let's bring it in. This solid will be our wall, and this will be, let's call it wall pattern. Perfect. Let's make all of this 3D layers, and the wall, let's scale it up really big. The wall pattern, let's scale it up, let's double it. And if we go to the front view, click on the camera tool. It's also C on the keyboard. Go to the dolly in and dolly out, and let's track over. And for the wall pattern, very simple. Let's move it over and let's tile it. Go to stylize, motion tile, and let's change the output width to about 500 and the height to 200. Perfect. Okay, now select the square. Make sure you have the selection tool, and let's move it over and let's scale it down to about 65. And let's move this one up. Let's move the second one down. Now feel free to change the placement. This is a placement that I'm using for this one, for this tutorial, but feel free to change however you want. Now select the first set and let's make a copy, Control D. And let's move it over in the X. Perfect. And I'm going to move over with the camera tool. And you can see we ran out of real estate for the wall. So all we need to do is we can move it over. Perfect. And let's go to this rectangle, which is this one. Make another copy, Control D, and let's move it over. Now, if you have more images, you would repeat this pattern until you have all of your frames. But for this one, we'll make a very small slideshow. Let me zoom out. And once again, make sure you're in the front view. The front view is the best view to add these frames and put the placement of all of these frames. Let's go to the wall and let's move the wall over. Perfect. Now the next step is to add the right pictures, the right frames for each of them. So go back to your project, and all we need to do is, again, we're going to use swap. So for the square, this is right. For this one, we'll use a second one. So holding down to Alt, click and drag, and let's swap it. And for this one will be square 03. Let's swap it. This one will be the fourth. And this last one will be using rectangle 03. Perfect. We're almost done. We're almost there. Now let's hide the wall pattern and the wall. Let's go to custom view 1. And there's one thing I need to point out. You remember that we created these frames in 3D by rotating the edges in 3D. But if we're rotating now, it looks pretty flat. And that's because we need to tell After Effects, hey, go back to the original comp and bring back the 3D edges that we made. And that's called collapse transformation. So if you see this little button right here, this little gear icon, if we click on it, it brings back the 3D edge. Let me click on it so you can see. It'll bring back the 3D edge. And if we do the same thing for the square, click on it, it's bringing back the 3D edge that we created. Select our layers and click on collapse transformation, and we're all set. Now let's go back. Let's go back and let's bring in the wall pattern and the wall. But now it's intersecting, so we need to push it back in Z space. Let's go to the top view and select the wall pattern and the wall, and we can simply just move it back in Z space. And let's hit P for position, and let's see what's going on. And let's make the wall 70, and let's make the wall pattern about 68. Go back to active camera. Perfect. Now we need to create our camera. So go to Layer, New Camera. We can make it 35 millimeter. And we can create a new null object. And this null object, make it a 3D layer. And let's call it Move Camera. Parent the camera to the null object. Let's change it to red. And hit P and Shift R to open up the position and the rotation controls, and let's set some keyframes. So let's put a keyframe for the position and for the X and the Y rotation. And I'm going to push this back in Z space. Perfect. And let's move it a little bit in the Y rotation, and let's move it a little bit in the X. Okay, it's pretty good. Now let's go forward to about 15 seconds. And all I need to do to give it some movement is just change the X value. And you can see we're just sliding across. Really simple, really easy. You can see we ran out of real estate, but that doesn't matter. We can fix that. For the pattern, all we need to do for the wall pattern, we can go back to effects and we can make it bigger, 600. No problem. Now, if you can keep it like this, where it just slides across, or you can add it more movement, more rotation. For example, we can give it a little bit more movement. It can rotate a little bit as well. Maybe it rotates a little bit more. So it's up to you. Now you can leave it like this, or you can add lights. And I will show you what you can do when you add lights. So go to Layer, New Light, and let's add a point light. Intensity of 100%. Make sure that you have cast shadows turned on. And for now, you can keep it at 50% and 20 pixels. So let's hit OK. And let's switch it to 4 views left. And I'm going to use these 4 views to help me place this light exactly where I want it, this point light. So let's move this up. And let's move it over here. And you can see that it's casting, it's really nice. It's casting a shadow. Give it some time because the render is, it's going to take a while to render this. You can see it's casting a nice shadow. The frame is casting a nice shadow, and even inside the picture, like right here inside, since we pushed it back in Z depth, it's also casting a nice edge, like a rim light. Nice. Okay. You can change the diffusion, the edge of it. You can change it, go to AA, and you can always change it. You can add more diffusion, let's say 40 pixels. And you can change the darkness. Now there's one more thing, there's 2 more things. It's a little bit too dark. Let's add an ambient light. So go to Layer, New Light, and let's change it to ambient. And let's give it an intensity of 20. So ambient light is like a global light. Everything is illuminated evenly. So this will help out. Perfect. And now if we move forward in time, you can see that our last picture frame is dark, and that's because the light is all the way where the first frame was. Now, if you have a very long slideshow, eventually it will go into darkness because the light won't be able to reach all the way at the very end. Now, you can add more lights, but there's a simple way, there's a simple method that you can do that will help you out. Just make sure that your time cursor is at the very beginning, and all you need to do is select your point light, and let's parent it to your move camera. And what that will do is wherever your camera goes, your point light, your light will follow as well. So if I show you, we go midway, halfway, you see where the light is moving exactly where the camera is moving. So that's a nice little trick to help you work with lights, but not make things overcomplicated with setting up, a dozen lights, which I would do in the past. And let's do a little RAM preview so you can see how it looks. And that is it for this tutorial. This will take a while, so I will fast forward until the RAM preview is done. A word of caution, if you're using shadows, your render time will significantly increase. So just be aware of that. If you don't want to increase the render time, you can disable the shadows. Just put cast shadows off, and you can go to Effect, Perspective, and put Drop Shadow. And you can just put a 2D drop shadow behind it. That is a nice hack that you can use, and it will speed up the render time. It won't be as accurate, but you can get away with it depending on the move of your camera. I truly hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you learned something new. Now, if you want to get started in the field of motion graphics, make some money, you should definitely check out the book that I wrote. It's available on Amazon, and I put a link to the book in the description below. The memories that we hold on to are priceless, but waking up today and living in the present moment, that is truly the gift. So make it count.